Hello, welcome in Gorilla Sports Off Ice Monday edition. Jesse Montano joined by Meghan Angley. We've got Andy behind the glass today, and today's episode is brought to you by Trusted American Mortgage. Trusted American salary-based mortgage consultants want to help you get a better interest rate and lower your monthly payment. Go to trustedamerican.com right now to see how much money they can help you save today. Hello and welcome in.
Please do not leave your luggage unattended on the station.
Welcome to the show. Hello, welcome in. Jesse Montano, Meghan Angley, sporting a brand new hairdo.
I cut all my hair. Just kidding.
Jesse Montano, Meghan Angley, Monday morning here, Monday afternoon, not morning anymore. Gorilla Sports Off Ice, Andy behind the glass today. Meghan, how are you doing? It's technically a holiday here. There's afternoon hockey on right now.
Right. It's distracting me a little
bit, but how you doing?
I'm doing great. I think the hockey has really helped. There's hockey on the weekend. This Four Nations tournament has been really fun. So I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I would honestly say about the same. Because of all this really fun hockey we've had to watch. This is a really this is a fun weekend. It's always nice when there's stuff, big events on TV that you can kind of look forward to. And Saturday with the afternoon game, Sweden-Finland, was able to get that queued up and watch that in the afternoon, then right into Canada, USA, which was a ton of fun.
Yes.
And then I was just telling these guys right before you got here, I got some nice sleep Saturday into Sunday. Don't know if it was because I was so worn out from all the hockey all day.
Yes.
Or what, but I got a real good night's sleep Saturday into Sunday, and it just kind of reset the whole vibe.
That's awesome. I need to improve my sleep. That's been a little dicey lately. It's self-inflicted.
My brother-in-law is on a big sleep health improvement journey.
Yeah. It's important. It's so important.
We've even learned very quickly with him, like it's so much more important than you think. Like it is so important to
it's true. I think it's the root of almost all of my problems most of the time is
No, for
quality
real.
sleep.
And people look past it a lot. Valentine's Day, I know you had some plans. What'd you get into? You're
Yes.
laughing. So
I did the painting class, and my friend Camille and I fully thought this was going to be a Galentine's filled class.
Uh-oh.
And it was purely couples.
Ah!
We didn't think that the men would be super bought into this idea, and they were. And it was a really hilarious social experiment because the canvas specifically, you had to work with your partner to make the same shades and start in the same places because you did one half of a heart in this tree portrait. And so you really had to collaborate, and it kind of tested different couples' collaboration skills. So Camilla and I passed flying colors. We did great, but it was really fun. I'm not sure if we want to bring the artwork in on set and auction it off to the highest bidder.
Demand that we do that.
I'll bring it in this week.
It's so funny because my wife is unbelievably artistic and crafty and all of that. And so there was years and years ago, I took her on a date to Upstairs Circus. You ever been there?
I want to go there. I've heard good things.
Yeah, so it's like the painting stuff, but they have a few different like types of crafts that you can do. And I remember taking her there, and they're just always real disheartening for me because she's so much better at them than I am. But what is funny is I can believe that there was a bunch of guys there who took their significant others on dates. Because I think as guys, as men, that's a like, oh, nice. Here's a real fun date that I'm sure she'll like. And it's, I don't know, maybe not as original as some people think for a surprise date night.
It was filled on Valentine's Day, and the morning of, we actually did not secure our spots for the class we thought we did.
Oh, dang.
There were 2 spots open, though, the morning of, and I just hope that it wasn't a couple that backed out because they hit some trouble. But
Megan took the place of a breakup.
Yeah, we took the place of a breakup, but we had a blast. So
with a minute 40 to go, Finland does cut the lead to 4-2. It looks like it was Mikkel Granlund that made it a little bit of a game here. So 100 seconds left. It's a 2-goal game.
They just made it 4-3.
You're lying. Megan's a little bit ahead of me, it seems like. Oh, boy.
They pulled, it was an empty net.
Yeah, a minute 17 to go, 4-3. Oh, boy. Not only does Canada need to win this game, Canada actually really could benefit from winning this game in regulation to get the 3 points. So we will be keeping an eye on this as it winds down here. But again, we just continue to see the drama from this tournament. And Megan, we're going to talk about trade deadline today. We're going to start getting primed up for that as when these teams come back. Wow, it was Granlund again. When these teams come back, we've only got weeks. And I mean, it's March 7th is when the deadline is. Today is February 17th. So, I mean, we're going to have a short amount of time here, about 2 weeks and some change. So you and I are going to get into that today. Some players that we see as potentials that the Avalanche could target. We're going to kind of just start going over some of the trade boards that are out there, right? You know, not necessarily angled for the Avs, just here's who some of the players might be that are out there, and maybe just any generalizations that you and I can make as we head into this trade deadline about teams that might be buyers, teams that might be sellers. And truthfully, Megan, I was telling you not to completely give away what we're going to talk about, but it was one of those things for me. And there is the empty net for Canada. It looks like Sidney Crosby will put this one on ice with 55 seconds to go. They made it interesting there. Holy smokes. So you and I will start getting into all that here today. Going to dip our toe in.
Yeah, because I think we should set the table for the deadline too.
Yes. No, that's what we're going to do here today.
Here's where the prospect pool is at. Yep. Here's what the draft capital looks like in a couple seasons ahead. And here are their biggest needs as diagnosed by us today. And you know, Megan, I went through, and I wasn't even putting together like an Avs trade board. I was going through and I was saying, okay, well, let me grab 10 plus players who I think might make sense for this group. And I did kind of come to some interesting conclusions here. I won't lie. Yeah.
Just about where the pool of available players is at. And here's the other thing I will say real quick. UC Saros is getting his steps in today. He's gone to the bench again. But here's where I actually want to start today's show before we get into all the trade deadline stuff, Megan. The NHL should never do an all-star game again, right? That's my biggest takeaway from this weekend.
It feels pretty definitive just how successful Four Nations has been. I think I've seen some of the preliminary numbers around some of the games, and the viewership has been really high. The engagement has been high. I think it points to the All-Star game needing to be a thing of the past because there's better.
It's it happening, USA Canada taking place on the same day as the NBA All-Star game, I think was the ultimate kind of, you know, when you compare them side by side. I've seen a lot of very prominent media members, you know, from ESPN, Barstool, outlets that are not very hockey focused, who are coming out today on all their shows saying the NBA looked silly this weekend, going head to head with what the NHL was doing. And I just think that if you are the NHL, you're not committed to doing an all-star game for another 2 years. And I believe, and you can maybe correct me on this, Megan, I don't believe that there's even a location set for the next all-star game that is set to come in 2027. Like, you have the opportunity here to still pivot and say, yeah, we're doing I think you should take it to 6 nations. But I think you should come out and say, we're doing the Olympics every 4 years, the World Cup of Hockey offset every 4 years, and then every year in the interim, we're doing a tournament like this. 4 nations, 6 nations, do 4 nations, and you relegate the team that finishes last. I don't know. But to me, they have found a recipe for success here. And I think if we find ourselves at another skills competition and another 3-on-3 All-Star game in 2 years, it'll be a failure on behalf of the NHL.
It will. I think the players will, behind the scenes, have a say in it too. It's clear that they care so much more about this format than they ever did about the All-Star game.
Yeah, and we've seen them change it on in so many instances of ways to try to get players to care. The players care. The 3 fights in 9 seconds for Team USA Canada. You see the celebrations, the crowds that have turned out to these games. I'm not condoning, the booing of national anthems and stuff, but it's clear the fans care. It's clear the fans are into these games. And we're set for a USA Canada final on Thursday. I just don't think there's any part of this you could possibly look at and say, yeah, that was good once, but we're fine. We'll go back to the All-Star game.
I love the continuity from World Juniors to, like, with Team USA reusing Free Bird for the goal song. It just got you hype, and it, for me personally, brought back great memories of the World Junior tournament and Team USA winning gold. So I think it just builds excitement around something that had existing excitement. The players care about it. It makes so much sense.
Yeah, no, I'm with you, and it. I know we have the World Championships every year in the summer, but those are made up of, one, players who aren't in the playoffs. So in a lot of instances, the league's best players aren't there. And 2, you have a lot of players who don't want to go, understandably, because it's the end of the year.
Right. It's their summer.
It's their summer. It's their break. You've just completed an 82-game season. And especially if you did make the playoffs, your body's beat up. You're tired. You're done. You want to rest. So I'm with you on the continuity of, like, well, we just had World Juniors a month and a half ago. You're still even kind of feeling that a little bit. You remember the way that some of those games went, the disappointment for Canada. That's maybe not the players who are playing, but in the minds of the people who run Hockey Canada, they want a little bit of revenge for a really disappointing tournament for them several weeks ago at World Juniors. So, yeah, I'm with you. I think it's just a really nice through line, straight from World Juniors into a tournament like this. And I just think that doing away with it or not, or just saying, hey, that was great once, and then not ever going back to it, I think would just be such a mistake.
Definitely.
Anything else on what we've seen from 4 nations? I guess we haven't talked since there was Canada US. What did you think of that game? And like I said, 3 fights to kick that one off. I had a ton of fun.
I had a ton of fun too. I was at the DU game while that game was happening, and it was really exciting. I also hate, one, that Canada didn't have Cale Makar, and goaltending is obviously an issue for them. And so it makes, it leaves almost a bitter taste in my mouth, to be honest with you. It's like, this is so close to being best on best.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, Team USA without a Quinn Hughes too is a difference maker, but
totally,
it was still a really competitive game. And I wanted to see a little more of Canada's best, because obviously the goaltending was not handled correctly in this tournament, I don't feel.
At all.
I think that's punctuated by the USA-Canada game. Gosh, was it so fun. And it's cool to see the way in which players that aren't talked about in the same way as Crosby or McDavid, like a Jake Gensel, get some time in the sun too, and represent Team USA in that way. So it was really fun.
Canada's player of the game in their 5-3 win over Finland, Colorado's Nathan MacKinnon. 2 goals in that game. He has 3 points on the tournament. He's in the mix. He's tied for second with a handful of other guys. There's a few players that have 4 points. So Nathan is right up there among the leaders in the league, and he is Canada's player of the game today. I want to revisit. We're going to come back to the tournament on Friday.
Yeah, we have Four Nations Friday.
Unpack all of it, because I think the goaltending, I think it was handled incorrectly for Canada going into the tournament, and then they kind of found themselves in a situation where they made their bed, and so they had to lay in it.
No, it's true, right? Like, I'm over here expressing maybe some sympathy, but it's because of the final product. It's at the expense of it, where I think this could have been even more competitive for Canada. And I would have liked to see Team USA stack up against it, because I still think it would have been competitive. I think there's differences in what each of those teams' strengths are. And for USA, I think the fights at the start of the game really did lend itself to what the strengths of the USA team would be. It is something around energy. I think that's kind of, when I think of Matthew Tkachuk, that's what I think of too. That's a player that you might not necessarily like playing opposite him, but that is the guy you want on your team.
Totally. Okay, let's shift gears here. Like you said, we will have our Four Nations Friday coming up here at the end of the week, the day after the gold medal game. That is happening Thursday. USA, Canada, should be a blast. Trade deadline is approaching. March 7th is the NHL's last day for teams to make trades, bring players in. You also do get into some weird logistics with after March 7th, even if you are adding a player to the roster, they can't play. Your rosters really need to be finalized by March 7th. And the Avs are a team with a handful of needs. For me, Megan, I kind of broke it out into 4 categories here. They need a 2C. You need a depth forward. You need some help. You need a lot of help on defense. And then they're just kind of like the bonus category of, hey, if you're going to add a really good player that you think improves your team. Those are all areas to me that in a perfect world, the Avs would be able to address all of them. But I think we're going to set the table today that I don't know if the Avs will be able to address everything. And that's going to be for a variety of reasons: cap flexibility, roster space, prospects. What do they have in terms of assets? Where do you want to start when getting into this conversation here about the Avs heading into the March 7th deadline?
I think digging into their needs, because I have it broken down to 2 categories, but I agree with how you've broken it into 4. I think the 2C is one of the priorities. And somewhere in there, I kind of have it listed as a top 6 forward option, but I kind of see a top 9 player making sense there too.
Yep.
That has versatility. It's tough because you feel like then you're maybe downgrading a little bit at the 2C position if this is a player that's flexing down in the lineup. But I worry with looking at what is out there in terms of centerman options that it's going to be hard to get a bona fide high skill 2C. You are kind of entering the veteran-y 2C category of the Ryan O'Reillys of the world in terms of what's out there. And so I'm just trying to tamper expectations, but I don't want to limit the front office and what they're capable of finding. If there is a bona fide 2C option that I'm just not thinking of, that is the need, though. That is the area of the roster that needs to be filled. And so I think what's interesting is the depth forward part of it, too. It's not that I don't think they need a depth forward. I guess I'm just wondering where that piece of the puzzle fits, because they bring in Parsonen. And they have Kiviranta floating around. They have a Parker Kelly floating around. They add Jack Drury. Miles Wood is there. And then I kind of separated Colton and LOC because I think Colton and LOC are kind of a tier above the bottom 6 picture.
Yep.
Like, they are going to be a lock for somewhere in there. They can play on a third line. You're comfortable even seeing Ross Colton get reps up in the lineup based on what he did earlier in the season. So the rest of that bottom 6 picture then is made up of what I just said: Parsonen, Kiviranta, Kelly, Drury, Wood. Who's coming out of that mix? Because somebody has to. And they they trade for Parssinen. So you don't want to necessarily lose that player for nothing.
Totally.
What do you envision there?
For depth forward?
Yeah.
To me, I'm looking at Kiviranta and Parssinen. Now, I think Parssinen's actually been pretty good lately, and I think he's even taken some steps.
Agreed.
And that skill is shining through a bit. And we've seen Joel Kiviranta elevate in the playoffs. Last year, he was very good. Megan, for me, I'm just looking at this roster, and I'm saying, okay, you got to make room for Val Nichushkin, right? We have to assume that he's coming back. I'm not doing that with Gabe Landeskog, but I'm going to assume that Val Nichushkin is back. So really, that pushes one of Parssinen or Kiviranta out of the lineup. In theory, right? You're probably not scratching Parker Kelly. He's a center. You're not scratching Logan O'Connor. And you're probably not scratching Jack Drury. He's been pretty good since he got here. You brought him in to be a third line center. Truthfully, just the way that Parsons played, it's probably Kiviranta. So I then sit there and say, okay, do you feel confident with one of two things? Do you feel confident with either Parssinen, Kelly, O'Connor as your fourth line? I don't think that's bad. But for me, the real question is Miles Wood, Jack Drury, Ross Colton, the third line that is as effective as the third line was 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago, when they won a Stanley Cup? And to me, that answer is no.
I agree with that.
Now, I do also think that there's maybe a little bit of a money in, money out situation here.
I think it has to be.
And I'm looking at Miles Wood. I just don't think Miles Wood has ever really fully rounded the corner into what they were hoping he would be here. He's got an injury that you're really uncertain on in terms of his availability from even one day to the next, Megan. And I look at that and say, if you could find a way to bolster that third line and go with Jack Drury, Ross Colton, and then a little bit of an upgrade, I think you feel a lot better. Or if you do feel comfortable with that, the second thing that I'm looking at is, all right, do you find a more safe replacement for Juuso Parssinen? And where my mind goes is the way they brought in Andrew Cogliano. Just someone that you feel on that fourth line is going to be the same type of player Parker Kelly and Logan O'Connor are.
And I think what is challenging is, I agree that I think the way the depth is currently constructed, there's a lack of trust.
Yeah.
And it's not in any one place, but there is kind of a beacon around Miles Wood and him being the weaker link on what is the third line presently. Because to your point, with Val Nichushkin eventually returning, that probably puts a Juuso Parssinen who's been playing on a second line. Maybe he's on that third line then with Colton, Drury. And I don't hate that.
Right.
I think the lack of experience, though, in a Parssinen is where you look at like Comfer, Burakovsky, and what that line was. This still doesn't feel quite like what that line was for the Avs in 2022. And that's where it's interesting then is, all right, you take Wood out of the equation. It still feels like, though, there's concern around Parssinen, but they don't want to waste either this player that they've given up a draft pick to acquire and a prospect, but it's fine. That one's lesser. We can live with it. And so I guess I'm just curious on what the plan is for Juuso Parssinen. And lesser so Miles Wood, because it feels like this maybe has been coming for a little bit now. Going back to when they signed his contract, they had a really different picture with goaltending and his play, and the injury has just not been to expectation. And it's a part of the lineup that they need to get more competitive, because it's fine as it's currently constructed, but it's not very strong.
I think that's the best way of putting it, Megan, is I think it's fine. Like, truthfully, I think you can be plenty competitive over the course of a regular season with, let's add Val Nichushkin back into the lineup here and say that's what we're going off of. I think I think you're happy with that. I think you think that that's competitive. You think you can win games with that. All of it. I just don't know if that's. I just don't know if it's quality enough to win a Stanley Cup. And you know, I like to draw on, you know, what they were doing in 2022, because that's the bar. You need to get your roster as close to that as you possibly can. And I think the way you just said it is perfect. I think it's fine. It needs to be better, more reliable.
Yeah, because I think when we have an honest conversation about the whole of it, you know, I've keyed in on Miles Wood or the question around how they use Juuso Pärssinen, but Kelly and Kiviranta are an interesting part of it too, because both have been players that have probably played above expectation in a way. And Chris MacFarland talks about this around the deadline, how the roster picture requires kind of the 775 players that do make league minimum to round out the bottom of the lineup. Like, you kind of just have to count on that. And it feels like maybe they have one too many of that, and some of that money tied up in like a Miles Wood, for example. On other NHL teams, I don't think that the money that Miles Wood makes is necessarily impossible to make work in a bottom six.
No.
I just don't think it works in Colorado's bottom six, and they have to make some interesting decisions, potentially even around Kelly and Kiviranta, who I've liked.
Well, and I also think that the Miles Wood money conversation might even be one of those things. It's like, yeah, it wouldn't even be a big deal for Colorado 3 months from now, but you need it right now. And again, like, Miles Wood was fine last year in the playoffs. He was fine.
I liked that line with Kiviranta and Colton.
Right. It was perfectly adequate. I don't know. I just, and again, this is one, and this is, I think, going to be what guides a lot of the conversation over the next couple weeks is, can you get better at that position? And I think that's the question that we'll be asking a lot is,
right,
can the Avs actually get better there? And I guess as we're talking about the depth forward, if you can improve on Miles Wood or Juuso Pärssinen in a fourth line, Juuso Pärssinen in a fourth line role, Miles Wood in a third line role, if you feel you can legitimately improve on that, you should do it.
Totally.
If you don't think that it makes you set and forget, no questions asked better, I would say just let it ride.
Yeah.
For me though, Megan, the number one need that has to be addressed is defense.
Yes, that's the biggest of them all to me. The forward picture kind of feels a little fluid. It's an issue, but how they address it, I feel like there's a few paths to address it. And some of that is guided by limitations too. Like, the paths that exist for them to fill a 2C hole are limited. And so that's what makes me feel a little more confident in what kind of options exist there. There are far more paths into how they can address defense, in my opinion, because it's not just the bottom pairing that they might want to shore up. It's the second pairing too. And how they do that directly relates to the other.
I would even go as far to say, Megan, that I almost think you need to address that middle pairing more than anything else.
Yes, because it feels like it's impacting why we feel we need to address the third pairing.
Let me just read out to you what the lines were. Game 3, Western Conference Final 2022. Gabe Landeskog, Nathan MacKinnon, Val Nichushkin, Arturi Lehkonen, Nazem Kadri, Mikko Rantanen, Nico Sturm, JT Comfort, Alex Newhook, Andrew Cogliano, Darren Helm, Logan O'Connor. With the benefit of hindsight, we know that fourth line really went on to be like one of the most dominant fourth lines in hockey. And again, you know whose name I didn't mention there? Andre Burakovsky, healthy scratch. Or he may have been injured in this game. That may have been the broken hand.
But
right.
He was a guy that could be the odd man out.
Right. Sturm was plugged in to that lineup, but really your third line was Andre Burakovsky, JT Comfort, Alex Newhook. That's a very different group of guys than Miles Wood, Jack Drury, Ross Colton. Nothing against any of the 3 current players on that line.
No.
But for me,
Ross Colton's carrying that.
Correct. Yeah. That third line would have slotted in. The Avs' current third line would have been clearly slotted in behind their third line 2 years ago.
I think that's completely fair to say. Ross Colton doing the heavy lifting there, it does fall off a little bit. And that's maybe giving a lot of credit to a Nico Sturm or an Alex Newhook who was not completely trusted by a Bednar. I think that players like Jack Drury have endeared themselves quickly to Jared Bednar, have earned a lot of trust. So there's pros and cons, but like the ceiling and the skill upside, that's definitely lacking on the third line as it's currently constructed.
Yeah, for sure. Sorry, I didn't mean to fully interrupt us there. But again, for me, Megan,
to the defenseman.
Yes, yeah. Sorry.
No, I love it.
If you do nothing else, you got to address that middle pairing, and if that means you go and get someone and it drops Josh Manson down, then great, you did that. If it means that you have to move Josh Manson out to upgrade on him using that money, then you need to do so. And now I will also say, as a small caveat here, you want to see a little bit of what Josh Manson does coming out of the Four Nations break.
Yes.
This is a guy who's clearly playing through injury. But for me, Josh Manson's got to figure that out quickly. We've seen him be very good here, very effective in a second pairing role, won a Stanley Cup in a second pairing role for Josh Manson, but he has not played to that standard or even close since the injury.
No, and it's the injury too, to give him some credit, all love for Josh Manson and what he did to help them in their 2022 run. He was a huge piece of that, but injury hampered the years that have followed. And it includes this year, but some of it has been just performance issues based upon some poor decision making.
Yep.
And whether that links back to injury in the end, remains a bit unclear. But the bottom line is he's not played well enough to be a second pair option for them this year, not consistently. And they already have kind of an interesting mix for the bottom pair. Like Calvin DeHaan has experience, but Malinsky doesn't. And you just know Jared Bednar doesn't trust a lack of experience, right? Whether it be an Alex Newhook or a Sam Malinsky. I think that they both are very similar in terms of how they are trusted. It's clear to me.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it interesting then when Manson's not playing to expectation on a second pair role. There's even less trust then in the third pair. And I think it just leads to overuse, a lot of stress on that top pair. And it hurts too, the overall goal scoring picture, because their back end is so vital to creating offense. And Taves and Makar are doing the heavy lifting, and they do every year. But I feel like they usually get more puck movements, assists, contributions generally from their back end outside of them that they haven't this year. And I think that's part of the issue too. It's a lack of trust, and it kind of points back to Josh Manson, because I think Sam Girard has continued on what he did last year in doing what was asked of him, being strong defensively, a good option on the PK, which will also be an interesting part in this, because Josh Manson, another key guy that they utilize on the PK to help alleviate some of the minutes from Taves and Makar. If they do need to make a hard decision around Manson, they need to replenish a penalty killing defenseman in the process, because they don't trust Sam Malinsky in that role. And Keaton Middleton has not been good in that way.
Well, it's Josh Manson gives them something different, especially in that top four.
100%.
He gives them something different. And that's, I did my mailbag last week, and someone had asked about trading Manson and what would you target. And by the time we got to the end of the video, there was someone who left a comment, said, so you'd trade Josh Manson to go out and trade for a player that profiles like Josh Manson? And it's like, I know that part of it is more of a conversation around the Josh Manson's shortcomings this year and how much he struggled. And when Josh Manson struggles, how much of a light it shines on that second pairing, needing a player like that who can play heavy, play in front of the net, kill penalties, and be a little bit more of a shutdown guy to read off of Sam Girard. To your point, I think you mentioned it last week. Right now, we are seeing Sam Girard having to cover for Josh Manson way too frequently.
Yes.
And you can shelter your third pair. It's be nice for them to have a couple guys who can shut down and kill penalties and play physical, but you can shelter that third pair a little bit. Your second pair needs to be impactful. And I think Sam Girard has trended up the last season and a half. And they need to get him someone who he can play off of, who can have positive impacts out there with him. And again, it's not that I don't think Josh Manson's capable of it. We've seen it. He's been around this team. He won a Stanley Cup with this team. I think he's a leader in that room. He's very vocal. But the play just isn't where it needs to be right now. And as we'll get into with Casey Mittelstadt here, this is a what have you done for me lately business. And right now the Avs need someone who's played better than Josh Manson has lately.
Yeah, because there's a lack of trust in the options past Malinsky, who I felt like I keyed in on a little unfairly there. But Keaton Middleton, also a player that could profile similarly to Josh Manson, but just doesn't have nearly the reps or the skill upside as Manson would. Like, that's not even a fair comparison. But he represents some of that physicality. And a Ludwig, who they also make a conscious effort to acquire earlier in the year. And the trust just clearly isn't there. So It's like, it is important to note what Josh Manson brings to the table when he's being Josh Manson, because he's not being Josh Manson right now. That's the issue.
Well, and you mentioned the trust. And you mentioned Calvin DeHaan has experience. Sam Malinsky doesn't. But I also feel like Jared Bednar trusts the experience, but I don't think he trusts the decision-making and the play that we've seen from Calvin DeHaan and clearly John Ludwig. And I think he appreciates the style that Keaton Middleton plays. But I think when he watches it, it's like, yeah, no, I don't trust that guy in the last 3 minutes of a game.
It's a really short leash. I think historically, we really didn't see Caleb Jones play. And when we did, it was bad because he wasn't playing regularly. And with Keaton Middleton, it's like the mistakes we see Keaton Middleton make, unfortunately, Calvin DeHaan is also making them. Sam Malinsky also making them. Josh Manson also making them. The difference is Keaton Middleton's shoving guys into the boards and playing a heavy physical game. So Bednar's at least getting that out of him. And to give people a rundown on where these players are at with their contracts currently with the Avs, because I think you hear about both Manson and Girard nearing the ends of their contracts with the Avs. So some people see that as maybe an opportunity to move them before their end. Josh Manson, 33 years old, in year 3 of 4 of a $4.5 million a year contract with a 12-team no trade clause. Sam Girard, 26 years old, year 5 of 7 of a $5 million per year contract with a 9-team no trade clause. Malinsky, 26 years old. He's going to be an RFA this summer. Keaton Middleton, 27 years old, just signed his extension for 2 more years at $775. And so obviously you've got kind of the affordable guys at the bottom of the lineup, but Manson and Girard, both with different no trade clauses, is something to consider in this too, that it might not be easy to just move Josh Manson, for example.
Yeah. Vaguely Sober asks, what about Oliver Shillington? Yeah, he's not even in my conversation right now.
I tried to consider it. It just doesn't make sense.
No.
Not in Colorado. Nothing about Shillington makes sense in Colorado. He should be playing hockey. We wanted him to go get reps with the Eagles over the break.
Yes.
I think it's a missed opportunity that he didn't. And it points to more necessity than ever. Like, if you care about Oliver Shillington as a person, he needs to go to a different organization and play hockey.
Yeah, he needs to go play somewhere. I just don't really think there's much of a home for him here. We do have a super chat here from Hurricane Teabag, $1.99. Any composters about why EP40 hasn't been playing? So this is a player who has actually, I was just looking to Elias Pettersson this morning. He has dropped off a lot of trade bait boards after being near the top of the list for a bunch of them when the drama with he and JT Miller was unfolding in Vancouver. Obviously, Miller's been traded in New York. Are you talking about for Sweden, or are you talking about for Vancouver leading up to the Four Nations break hurricane? Thank you for the $1.99. Do you know Pettersson? Has he not been playing for Vancouver?
I didn't think so. Like, I didn't think he wasn't.
Yeah.
Unless it was maybe like the game before the break.
It looks like maybe he wasn't playing
for Sweden.
Yeah. Center's offense. Oh, wait. Or are they just saying... I was interesting. Anyone's been noticing. It's not even only had him moving him down the lineup for Sweden. I don't know. He's a I think Elias Pettersson's a really interesting player. I think I don't know if he gets enough of the same flack that a guy like Patrick Laine gets. A lot of people talk about Laine being super lazy and just wanting to go out there and, rip snapshots from the circle. I don't know if Pettersson gets enough of a hard time for that. He had the huge breakout year like 2 or 3 seasons ago, and then he has been aggressively average since.
After he signed his extension, too, he got the big money. He just hasn't lived up to the expectation that the money is supposed to support. And I think that's where a lot of the frustrations in Vancouver were born from was, okay, we're giving you this money because we believe you have another level that you can reach, but you need to reach it. And there was a sentiment of him needing to be tougher. And I put that in quotes because I do think it means more accountability, more engagement, and more leadership. And I just don't think those things have really come to fruition. Still a really skilled player, but I think that's being keyed in on more now this year, especially on the heels of the contract extension. But I don't know, it's not my monkey.
Right. Yeah. Not my monkey, not my circus. He's in year 1 of an 8-year deal, paying him just north of $11 million. I want to touch real quickly on the Avs prospect pool situation. You and I talked at the beginning of the season, or a little bit of the ways into this season. Megan, you and I saying that, like, hey, maybe this Avalanche organization hasn't gotten quite enough credit for how many players that are NHL ready or near NHL ready within their organization. But when you step back and you look at it from the bigger picture, I don't know if there's a ton of players in here that are super enticing when you're talking about trade assets. Agree, disagree?
No, I agree. I think where they've done well is to replenish maybe where they've given up draft capital by tapping into the college free agent market. But the players that they're getting are the kind that you can plug in around the fringes. And so there's NHL upside, but it is limited to kind of a depth role, whatever position. And I think that's still commendable and a really great way for the front office to replenish the prospect pool, but it's not necessarily adding into it highly touted prospects that are going to be trade bait to help get a deal across the finish line. You know, they're going to be a supplemental piece like Andre Pavel to bring about Juuso Parssinen, another player to build around the fringes. So I don't have a harsh criticism of, the front office or the organization for where the prospect pool is at necessarily. I think they're doing the best they can to navigate this cap era and past deadlines where they have tried to be aggressive and make the team better, especially the 2022 year. That was a very good deadline for the Avs. But there just isn't a lot to entice other teams, in my opinion, in the prospect pipeline right now, outside of a Cal Ritchie. Even a Guliev, I think, should be, but probably isn't really high on other people's radars. And so I don't know that there's much else past that.
It almost feels like, because I do think Guliev is a player that should be someone that the Avs can that should be enticing to other organizations, to the point that I would even say, just based on what he's done since being drafted, of like, be really sure before you move on from that kid.
Yes.
About a trade. And then I do also wonder, I don't know if you want to bark up this tree given what you've had to do in recent years and what you're going through right now. Nabokov? I don't know. And again, I don't know how much that gets people excited, other GMs, about, do you want a prospect that's a few years out and a goalie who's almost completely unpredictable? But you can't deny what he's doing right now in Russia.
I think it's a solid point because I do sense every year, I feel this is pretty true, that goaltending is a difficult position and teams find themselves in a place of desperation and a little bit of panic. And I do wonder then if that would have some appeal, because for a goaltender, he's like a little older than a traditional goaltender prospect, obviously playing in a pro men's league, so getting some decent reps there too, that he might be a little more pro ready than the true prospect young goaltenders.
And already having I believe they just call it MVG of the KHL playoffs last year.
Yeah.
He's a KHL All-Star, having another very good year again this year. I don't know. Like, I look at a team like Chicago, and I mean, outside of Seth Jones, I don't even know if there's anything on that roster you look twice at that would be available for trade, obviously. But I'm just using them as an example. Like, I don't know, is that a team that would really covet the opportunity to add a guy like Nabokov to their organization that, gosh, I don't know, you could maybe even convince to come over as soon as next year for an NHL net?
Yeah.
For an organization that does not have a goalie prospect in the pipeline, doesn't really have any kind of solution in net. I don't know, is that a team that would be interested in a player like that? But to your point, that would have to be a team that would really have to be the right fit, and they'd have to really have a need for a young up and coming goaltender.
Yeah, it'd be probably a little bit of a pivot from what we see most teams do with goaltending too. You don't normally see them take the gamble on the young goaltender for a starting job, but that would make more sense to trade for that, because I imagine whatever the Avs expect in return to give up Nabokov would have to be pretty decent.
Pretty significant. Yeah. No, I'm with you. And I mean, like I said, that's why I'm saying I look at, if you wanted to get involved in the Seth Jones conversation, which it sounds like maybe the Avs have been.
Right.
There's a lot of caveats with that because he makes more than Cale Makar makes. So it'd have to be a lot of money being eaten before that could even enter into the conversation of, does this work? But, I don't know. If you were having that conversation, does Nabokov feature as some type of centerpiece with a team like Chicago in a deal like that? I don't know. That's mostly just me drawing attention to the fact that, to your point, Megan, there's a lot of NHL talent in the Avs prospect pool, but most of them are pretty capped out at fringe guy who can contribute in a depth role. And there's very little that really gets teams excited. There are some pieces there.
Yeah, like a Cal Ritchie.
Right. And I think you could even, the injury doesn't help, but you could even make the argument for Sean Behrens.
I think we see his value most clearly, but I don't know that the rest of the world does.
Mm-hmm.
So
right. Yeah.
I don't know that he would fetch a great return, but I believe that he should. I think teams are sleeping on the defenseman prospect pipeline for Colorado between Guliev and Behrens.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. But for my money, I'd honestly probably say for any scouts who are actually doing their job in scouting the Avalanche organization, I think it's Ritchie. I think it's Guliev. I think it's Nabokov, and I think it's Behrens. I don't think Olausson is. I think that's hardly even a trade piece at this point. And then I think Foodie is maybe in a tier below those other guys that I just mentioned of, hey, here's an older, more NHL ready prospect if you're willing to give him a chance and get him into your lineup.
Yeah. Foodie is an interesting one. He's a little bit of a project. He's exciting though. That's the difference with Olausson, is there just isn't really anything exciting about his game. very one-dimensional. I hate, keying in on that. And then
you're not the one making him be. Hey, you're not telling him, hey, go out there and only score goals, Oscar Olausen. That's not your fault.
But the Prishepovs, the Ivans, fringe guys who've exceeded expectation, super excited about them. A little bit raw, so I don't know that other teams, see like a plug and play fit there with that type of player.
Now, let me interrupt you again to ask you about Prishepov. Are we maybe sleeping on him a bit, given that this kid is a 7th round pick from this past year's draft who already has NHL games under his belt now? Is that maybe a player that we aren't giving enough credence to here, saying, hey, no, this is a player in his D+1 year playing legitimate American League minutes, being impactful, and has already earned multiple NHL call-ups. Is this maybe a higher end prospect than we're giving credit for?
I think I'm appropriately valuing because I think highly of him. I just think he was put into an interesting situation from the circumstance of the Avs and injuries. And I think he exceeded expectation.
Yep.
And he's getting the opportunity that he is in Loveland because they see that value in him. But I just don't know how much value that commands around the league, because I think there are players like that exist on other American League teams, unfortunately. And it's valuable to the Avs internally. It's extremely valuable.
Yep.
But I don't know how valuable that is to the rest of the league, who probably has something of a Prishepov in the American League pipeline.
8 goals, 19 points in 35 games for Prishepov as a 20-year-old, like I said, in his first year after being drafted.
They picked well, like for such a late round pick.
217th overall, Megan.
Yeah, he's a center, so that adds depth down the middle, and he's being utilized pretty truly as one at times. Same with Ivan. That's been different from the past with some of their forward prospects. They get moved to the wing and they stay there, and it's not very helpful from a versatility standpoint in the future. So that heightens the value for Prishepov. Ivan.
I think Ivan's maybe another one that I'm not giving enough credit to. That could be a piece that other teams would be interested in.
I could see, because he got significant reps at the NHL level, and he made some noise in preseason too.
Yep.
So I think that's a player that is closer to NHL ready. It's just a matter of fit. The path to the NHL in Colorado is very tough for a player like Ivan, but I think there are teams that would be intrigued by a young player with untapped upside that might have more opportunity for him more immediately.
Yep. No, and for the record, I'm not advocating that the Avs move on from either.
Yeah, maybe I'm being protective of them.
Or Ivan.
They're properly valued. Don't move them.
But as we do look at things, the assets this team could use to upgrade the NHL roster, I actually would maybe I'll throw Ivan and Nikita Prishepov into that list. Maybe in the Jean-Luc Foudy tier. As a, hey, these guys.
I put them a little above Foudy. I think they surpassed Foudy, because I think they proved more on an NHL stage than Foudy was able to.
So how do you feel about this? A 3-tiered Avs prospect pipeline system that could be trade bait. We've got Richie, Gulyayev. I'm putting Barons up there.
Oh, hell yeah.
And then Nabokov. That's the top tier. And the next tier down is going to be Prishepov and Ivan, and then after that, you maybe got a Jean-Luc Foudy as a player that is more fully cooked. You can put him in the NHL if you feel like you got a spot for this guy.
Yeah, no, I don't hate that.
And I think if you're going off that, you're gonna have to get picks involved and things like that. But I don't think the Avs cupboards are as bare, maybe as people like to say, and even maybe as we suggested a little bit at the start of this conversation.
I think the way that I view it is they're not bare. They have a lot of value to the Avs specifically, but outside of the Avs, that might be a little bit different of a picture. The value varies. And to some teams like Nabokov, there might be more value to another team than to the Avs presently, who just signed Blackwood to an extension. So, it's mixed, and it is not me saying that these prospects are bad or anything like that. I just think that we see more value in some of these players to the Avs specifically for good reason.
Yeah. Josh Brunson, Foudy is not an NHL player. There's a real argument for that. But I think that there's enough Buffaloes and San Jose's and Anaheims and Chicago's of the league. There's an NHL roster out there where Jean-Luc Foudy could get some games.
Yeah, I think he'll be fighting on the fringe a little bit.
Totally. And don't get me wrong, this is a throw-in piece at the end of the deal to get it over the finish line.
Because he's, I talk about how there's Proshepovs on other NHL lineups. One, Proshepov can exceed that expectation, first and foremost.
He's still young, yep.
Yeah. But with Foudy, what Foudy has that can separate him from other players that exist on other teams is his skating, his speed and his skating. It is pretty highly skilled, and his playmaking has improved too. So there are some things that can separate Foudy, but he has shortcomings too. So that's why, he's a little bit of a project for any NHL team that would even consider taking a gamble on him.
Yeah. From Vaguely. Foudy pregame skate zombie stare.
He does disassociate at warmups. I don't know why. I don't know if I'll ever know why.
Well, and I feel like he also does that when we go talk to him in the locker. Megan, I'm just going to go through quickly as we wind down here. I'm going to go through the names that I went through and just grabbed and said, I don't know. These are the players that I would put on my board if I was Chris McFarland. And again, we're not gonna dive in super deep on any of this. If there's any that you want to discuss real quick, we can. But truthfully, I think all of these, with the exception of my one bonus, I think they're all flawed, and they've all got reasons why it wouldn't make sense, reasons why it would, and then of course there's a caveat on all of these of what would they cost you in terms of assets. But these are all players that I think would make sense for the Avs, and are something that I think they could realistically afford. I don't think any of these are overly pipe dreamy. So for 2C, and actually, you know what? I'm going to circle back to that because that's the one that I had the biggest kind of revelation.
It's hard. Yeah.
For depth forwards, there was 3 names that I grabbed as I was kind of going through: Ryan Donato, Nick Bukestad, and Brandon Tanev. These are all guys with cap hits under 2.5, varying roles and varying responsibilities you'd be asking them to fill in. Of course, Donato and Bukestad both can play center. If you wanted to improve your center depth in that bottom half of your lineup, Brandon Tanev is kind of a Cogliano-esque type guy, more meat and potatoes for the bottom part of your lineup. For D, I think Mario Ferraro is an interesting name that's out there, Megan. Cale Makar, played with him at University of Massachusetts. Younger player, still 27, I think fits into your scheme. That's a player that could be here for a while. Don't know if he necessarily fits in stylistically, but I like that ad. Seth Jones, I mentioned, and I only have his name on here because we've heard that the Avs have been tied to him. Carson Soucy as kind of that like prototypical shutdown second, third pair guy that defensively responsible, kills penalties, things like that. And then I did add Noah Dobson to this list, not because I'm even super sure that he's out there and really available. But we've heard some murmurings that might be a player that the Islanders would be willing to move on from. Look, that's easily the most expensive defenseman that I just listed in terms of acquisition cost, his age, his production, all of that. And then my bonus player, Megan, you already know, I fully sold myself on this based on nothing. Brad Marchand. I just think that would be a huge added punch to the to the top 6. That's a guy who has played center at times in his NHL career, but you could also stick him on the wing next to Nathan McKinnon. That's just if you were really having fun with it and can make it work. My 2C, Megan, the only one that I put on the list where I said, look, if you are shipping Casey Mittelstadt out and saying we're bringing in someone who we think gives us a better chance right now, there was only one name I could come up with, and I don't even love the name. It's Ryan O'Reilly.
Ryan O'Reilly.
And I don't love it because you get older. Ryan O'Reilly's clearly on the back half of his career. He's not as good as he was a few years ago. But that to me is a player that it's like, yeah, we know what we're going to get, and we'd probably be pretty happy with it.
Yeah. Well, I think that's what is been the biggest issue with Casey Mittelstadt is not knowing what you're going to get.
Right.
There hasn't been consistency, started hot and then has just been kind of consistently not so good.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this fear of, will it ever level out? Was there a middle ground between what we saw at the start of the year and what we've seen over this last stretch now of 40 plus games? So I think that a Ryan O'Reilly type player is interesting, but you look at the 1-2 punch of the 2022 team, and I just don't think you'll ever have that again, which is tough.
Mm-hmm.
But you also don't want to be sacrificing, like, your fourth line already probably will never also be as strong as that fourth line was either. So I just want to see them shore up something to be stronger than one aspect of the 2022 team where they can. I don't know if addressing the second line center position is an area of the lineup where that will be possible at this deadline. You kind of mentioned the conclusion you came to that it's something they maybe address in the summer.
Yeah. And that was really what I realized looking at the 2C stuff. And really, if you're doing the Ryan O'Reilly thing, that's a 1-for-1 Casey for O'Reilly, maybe even with a pick coming back your way. And that's also a move where you're saying, hey, we're going to do that. And then we're going to make use of that extra money that we just, that extra $1.5 million that we just freed up by going from Mittelstadt to O'Reilly. But again, I don't even know if there's a huge assurance that you wouldn't be right back in this same situation trying to deal with it again in the summer anyways, or next year at the deadline. Like, I don't know if Ryan O'Reilly is a 2C much beyond this season, or if he's closer to a 3C at this point in his career.
So many of the center options that I've looked around are older. And I think there's maybe some reality to that too, is players that are trusted with a second line center role are often going to be a little bit older.
Azim Kadri.
So I do think there's some truth to, okay, I think that's just part of it, is to earn that trust and responsibility there. You do have to have a little bit more experience. I think it takes some time, which makes you feel a little sad then on Casey Mittelstadt. Like, does he have that potential in him someday? He probably does. He probably has more upside. The trouble is where the Avs are at in their window right now.
Right.
So I don't really have players earmarked for how I think they should address the second line center. I mean, Ryan O'Reilly makes my list. It's kind of just generally looking at the Preds because they've fallen off this season. They only have 45 points and they are near the bottom of the league in the standings. It's been a downward spiral for them. So I feel pretty confident that they have to consider selling. One, they need to get younger. I think they're in a position to get younger, but they need to make some decisions around their roster right now to move players out, to make room for young players, to give them opportunity that they don't have right now, because they committed to a very weird roster plan over the offseason that I think they need to start shipping some of those parts off out of necessity. Ryan O'Reilly, Nyquist. I'm not saying I should have any interest in those players like a Colton Sissons either, but I think they're going to be looking at those three players to be parts that perhaps get moved out.
Well, and their biggest issue is the deals that they gave to Stamkos and Marchessault and stuff like that. Like, they could be having a yard sale right now and really collecting assets and young players, and they could kind of retool quickly. They're going to have a hard time doing that for sure. But yeah, O'Reilly is one that it's like, yeah, if you got it, I don't think anybody would be upset. I think he'd come in and be a nice piece. Him and Nathan McKinnon are great friends. I think that'd be fine, but it's not really a long-term fix. It's kind of patchwork stuff to see where it takes you through the rest of the season. And I mean, truthfully, all the names I read off here, Brad Marchand, the Bruins are still right in the mix. I think they'd have to, lose a handful of games right away coming out of the Four Nations tournament and really get behind the 8 ball for them to even be interested in moving a player like that. He's a pending UFA at the end of the year. We'll see if he makes it there. So I don't know. Like I said, Noah Dobson, that's probably too expensive of a deal to do in season. What else did I even have on here? Yeah, and again, then suddenly we're, Seth Jones. I think that money is really hard to make work in season. Mario Ferraro. I don't know how much San Jose is wanting to move on from a 27-year-old defenseman. What would they want to get that deal done? So I really do. I think if Chris McFarland can pull off some magic here and make a few things happen to help bolster the overall lineup health of the team, then he should do it. But I also don't think you should overpay for anything. And if you need to just wait till the summer, you can do that.
Yeah. I want to talk about some of the names that you've mentioned. Mario Ferraro being one of them. I think that he's a player that makes a lot of sense. Obviously, the concern is how willing is San Jose to move on from a player like that. He's in year 3 of 4 of a $3.25 million per year deal, and he kills penalties. So he adds back in what maybe, whether that means Manson is coming out or is being moved down, he just adds another option to kill penalties where they've needed a little bit more support. He's a top 4 defenseman, a left-hand shot though, so I think they'll still maybe want some of that lefty-righty balance captured in some way. So I'm not sure how married to that Bednar is. I know he likes to do that, but it might not be an option. But looking at San Jose, they're last in league. They are in full rebuild mode, and so if the return made sense for San Jose, I could see that being something the Avs are extremely interested in. If they were looking to maybe have a flex player that could do bottom pair, second pair kind of duty, I like Matt Grzelcyk out of Pittsburgh, and I think that is a team that is rebuilding.
Yep.
They've already moved on from Marcus Pettersson, Drew O'Connor, so I think they kind of demonstrated that they're willing to move out some pieces. He's 31 years old, so he's kind of in the Calvin DeHaan territory, but his speed is good, and I think that would be an interesting and affordable fit because he's only 2.75 and he's UFA. So they have this potential to re-sign him if it makes sense, but it's not a lot of money to take that on. And it's just a player that I've had interest in the past.
Yeah.
You mentioned Donato. I liked Donato when he was a depth piece in Seattle.
Yeah.
And I think he's a career high in goals this year with Chicago. So a player that I liked with the Seattle and the depth of the Seattle version of that team that we got during the title defense season. So I kind of like him. I think he is more of a 3C. So it's not necessarily a 2C option. But he's got some versatility. He's affordable. And when I look at what Andrew Cogliano added to the Cup team, I do, when you mention a Brad Marchand, even a Ryan O'Reilly.
Yeah.
I think having guys like that added to the Avs mix makes a lot of sense and can have a huge impact to the locker room. I think Nashville overloaded their locker room with this type of player, and it didn't make sense. But I could see a player like Donato having that effect. I think he's a leader in Chicago. I think Brad Marchand, Ryan O'Reilly, those feel like you're dreaming on that a little bit,
for sure,
but you love it because I do think there's added value for what they add to a locker room. And so I have some interest in that. I'm looking at my list here to see, like a Kerfoot, if Utah is interested in moving on from him for a depth piece, just to be extremely clear. I think maybe that's just me reminiscing on some old Avalanche memories and the fit that I liked from him once upon a time. But that's a player I'd have interest in as a depth player.
As a depth piece. Let's round it out today with the super chat from Drew, 13.99 Canadian. Drew, thank you very much. Always popping in. I'm a little late, but hearing you talk about Chicago, what do you think about Vlasic? It's Alex Vlasic. Costs more, but much cheaper than Jones. I just don't think they'd move him. For me, it's the last part of that sentence there. I don't think he's 23. Part of the reason why I think Chicago would be interested in moving on from Seth Jones is he doesn't really fit into the time frame that they are looking at, the age of that roster and everything. Alex Vlasic, just 23 years old, 6'6". That would definitely be a nice piece for the Avs.
Yeah, definitely would have interest. But to your point, don't know if Chicago would be willing to part ways with. I think Seth Jones is a player that gets moved at this deadline. Don't know if it ends up coming to Colorado, but I think 9.5 for 5 more years.
Yeah,
it's a lot of money to tie up in a defenseman and a full no move clause. So a little bit of his future is in his own hands too.
And it's hard to picture a Chicago wanting to eat half that salary for that long.
Yeah.
All right, Megan, I think that's it. Anything else for today? Setting the table for trade deadline.
Yeah. Just trying to see in my list here if there's anyone pressing that I wanted to talk about, but I don't think there is. I'm glad you mentioned Donato. I like him.
I think he's an interesting name to keep an eye on here.
Well, are there any names you're not interested? You're like, hey, this has come up, and I don't think that makes any sense at all.
If I'm being truthful, Seth Jones is the one that I just don't think it makes a lot of sense right now. If you want to get into it in the summer and get another team involved to eat some of that salary and kind of do that as like a set and forget second pairing guy, then okay. That is the one that like I really do worry about them getting involved with that now in the season and how messy that could get.
Yeah, I'm not interested in Seth Jones too much. And going back to the depth conversation we had earlier, I think Tanev is a player that does get moved, but I just don't know if his fit makes sense for Colorado unless the Avs do something to move a player out.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, for sure. All right. That's going to do it for today. Megan and Chloe will be back at it, assuming Megan gets out of the snow. We'll be back at it tomorrow for Pucks and Prosecco, and then we'll be back on Friday with Four Nations Friday, and we're just going to continue to peel the layers of this trade deadline onion. As like I said, we're only going to have a couple weeks to go coming out of this tournament, which ends this week. Avs are back at practice on Wednesday, so we will be there for you guys as well, bringing you all the coverage from that practice after this 2-week break for the players. For Meghan Angley, we got Andy Gilmore back there behind the glass. I'm Jesse Montano. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, hanging out with us this morning. Stay warm if you're here in Colorado. We're supposed to get a hard freeze again tonight. I saw on the interweb, so it's going to be terrible. Have a great night, everybody, and we'll be back at it tomorrow. We'll talk to you then. Bye.